quiet Saturday at Fairview Oaks. The drive out to Fairview Oaks Country Club took Marcus Webb 22 minutes from his townhouse in the city, the same 22 minutes it had always taken since the first morning he made that drive 8 years ago in a rented sedan with a clipboard on the passenger seat and a folder of financial projections that told him he was either making the smartest investment of his life or the most expensive mistake. He had been 34 years old. He had been tired in the way that people are tired when they have been working toward something for so long that the tiredness becomes indistinguishable from the work itself. And when he pulled through the iron gates that morning and saw the peeling paint on the gatehouse and the fountain in the forecourt sitting dry and full of leaves, he had not felt discouragement. He had felt something closer to recognition. The way you feel when you see a thing that has been neglected by people who stopped believing in it, and you understand immediately that you are not one of those people. Fairview Oaks had been a mid-tier country club on the slow side of decline when Marcus first learned about it through a real estate contact who described it as a liability dressed up as an asset. The membership had been shrinking for years. The golf course needed resurfacing. The main clubhouse had a dining room that seated 140 people and served about 30 on a good Sunday. 3 of the original founding families had quietly sold their shares back at a loss, and the remaining board was the collection of men in their late 60s who had run out of ideas and were hoping someone younger would come along and absorb the problem. Marcus had come along. He had not been the only bidder, but he had been the most prepared. And after 2 months of due diligence and one very long board meeting that stretched past 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, Fairview Oaks had become, in the quiet legal language of the transfer documents, primarily his. He did not announce himself when he visited. That had been his practice from the beginning, a habit he had explained once to his business attorney as a preference for seeing things as they actually were, rather than as people arranged them to be when they knew he was coming. His attorney had called it eccentric. Marcus had called it necessary. In 3 years of unannounced visits, he had learned more about the actual operations of the club than 6 months of quarterly reports had told him. And what he had learned had mostly been good. The staff turnover had stabilized. The dining room was doing real numbers on Friday and Saturday evenings. The golf course had been resurfaced and reseeded, and now drew weekend players from 4 adjacent counties. But there were things the reports could not tell him, and those were the things he came to see in person. This particular Saturday morning in early September, he was not thinking about any of that. He was thinking about Nadia. His daughter was 8 years old and had decided, with the absolute certainty that 8-year-olds bring to their decisions, that she wanted to learn to play golf. The request had come 3 weeks earlier, delivered at the breakfast table with the same seriousness she brought to everything. Her chin slightly lifted, her small hands flat on the table, the way she put them when she was making a case. She had seen a tournament on television, she explained. She had noticed that the grass was very green and the players were very quiet, and that hitting a small ball a very long way seemed like an excellent use of a Saturday. Marcus had listened to the full argument before telling her yes, which was the only answer he had ever seriously considered. He had signed her up for a junior beginner session with the club's head instructor. He had told her she could pick out her own glove. The glove she chose was pale blue with a small embroidered star on the wrist, and she had placed it inside her canvas bag the night before, with the same care another child might give to packing for a trip. They arrived at the main entrance of the clubhouse at 8:40 in the morning. Marcus was wearing dark chinos and a plain white linen shirt, no tie, the kind of clothes he wore on any weekend when he had nowhere formal to be. Nadia was in khaki shorts and a white polo shirt that she had chosen specifically because she had seen golfers wear them on television, and she had her canvas bag over one shoulder and was asking for the 3rd time in the car ride whether the grass on the practice green would be the same color as on the television. Marcus told her it would probably be similar. She considered this. She said she hoped it was a little more blue-green than regular green, because blue-green was more satisfying. Marcus said he thought that was a reasonable preference. The lobby of the main clubhouse was cool and smelled faintly of cedar and cut flowers. The floors were polished limestone pale gray, with occasional veins of white running through the slabs like rivers seen from a great distance. Along the left wall there was a long credenza holding framed photographs going back to the club's founding, and in the largest of them, a wide-angle image taken at the reopening ceremony 3 years earlier. A small crowd of people stood in front of the newly refinished entrance, smiling in the bright morning light. In the back of the crowd, slightly off to one side and partly obscured by the shoulder of a taller man standing in front of him, Marcus Webb stood, with his hands in his pockets and a quiet expression that could have been satisfaction, or simply the look of a man who had gotten used to standing slightly outside the frame of his own accomplishments. The photograph was there every time he visited. He never pointed it out to anyone. A young woman at the welcome desk, her name tag reading Priya, looked up when they entered and smiled with what seemed like genuine warmth. She reached under the desk for the junior program check-in forms and slid them across the counter, already noting Nadia's name from the reservation. "Miss Nadia Webb," she said, glancing down at the form. 9 o'clock with Patrick, right? Nadia straightened slightly at being addressed by her full name and said yes, that was correct. Priya told her Patrick was one of the best instructors on staff and that she was going to have a great morning. Nadia said she intended to. Marcus filled out the sign-in section while Priya walked Nadia through what would happen during the session. And it was during this exchange that Marcus first noticed the woman standing at the far end of the reception area. She was in her late 40s, with close-cropped silver hair and a jacket that matched the club's formal staff colors of deep green and ivory. Her lanyard held a series of cards and a staff badge that Marcus could not read from that distance. But her posture and the way she was watching the entrance told him she held some kind of supervisory position. The particular alertness of someone who has made watching the door their professional habit. She was not looking at the welcome desk. She was looking at Marcus. Not the way people look at someone they recognize, but the way people look at something they are categorizing, running through a quiet internal checklist of whether a thing is in the correct location. Marcus signed the form. He handed Nadia's completed sheet back to Priya. He did not look again at the woman at the end of the reception area, but he was aware of her in the peripheral, careful way he had learned over many years to be aware of exactly this kind of attention. He helped Nadia adjust the strap on her canvas bag. He told her he would walk with her to the junior program building and then come back and wait in the clubhouse. As they crossed the lobby toward the corridor that led to the athletic wing, he heard footsteps behind him, measured and deliberate, on the limestone floor. They slowed only when he did. He did not turn around yet. He was thinking about his father, who had been a groundskeeper at a club much like this one in the early 1980s, and who had described once with a quiet matter-of-factness that said everything about how long he had carried the memory, being told to use the service entrance even though he had been on staff for 11 years. Marcus had been perhaps 12 when he heard that story. He had not fully understood it then. He understood it now in his whole body, in the way understanding sometimes migrates from the mind to somewhere deeper and less articulable, where it sits not as knowledge, but as something older. The footsteps continued to follow at a measured distance. Nadia looked up at him and said, "Dad, do you think the instructor will let me try with a real club today, or just a practice one?" Marcus looked down at her. "I think probably a real one," he said. "You're 8. You're ready for real ones." She considered this, with her chin lifted again, the expression she wore when weighing something important. Then she nodded, apparently satisfied, and turned her attention back to the corridor ahead of them. Behind them, the footsteps did not stop. The terrace that wasn't for them. Marcus walked Nadia as far as the glass doors of the junior athletic wing, where a young man with a cart of junior-sized clubs was waiting at the entrance with the easy, unhurried manner of someone who liked his job. His name was Patrick, and he crouched slightly when he saw Nadia approaching, so that they were closer to the same height, and he said, "You must be Nadia. I heard you wanted to learn to play golf." Nadia said that was correct, and that she had a specific interest in hitting the ball a very long way. Patrick said those were exactly his specialties, and that they were going to get along very well. Marcus watched his daughter walk through the glass doors without looking back, which he had learned to interpret as her version of confidence, the comfortable departure of someone who has decided the situation is under control. And he felt the particular combination of pride and mild wistfulness that had begun to accompany most of her confident departures. He stood there for a moment after the doors closed. The morning air coming through the side corridor had the quality September air often has in this part of the country, neither the full weight of summer nor the clean bite of fall, but something suspended in between, still warm, but with a faint undertow of change moving through it. He turned and walked back toward the main clubhouse. The woman with the silver hair and the green and ivory jacket was waiting in the corridor. She was standing in a position that was not quite blocking his path, but was close enough to it that to walk past her would have required a deliberate sideways step. Her hands were clasped in front of her. Her expression had the professional neutrality of someone who has practiced looking pleasant while delivering unpleasant information. Her badge read, Diane Colson, Director of Membership Services. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," Marcus said. "I don't believe I've had the pleasure," she said, and the phrase carried a very specific weight. The kind of weight a phrase acquires when it is not actually an introduction, but an inquiry dressed in the clothes of one. "Marcus Webb," he said. He did not extend his hand. She did not offer hers. "Mr. Webb," she paused. "I wanted to check in with you about your membership status. Our records show you signed up through the Corporate Access Program. Is that right?" Marcus had a full individual membership, the highest tier the club offered. He had purchased it as part of the ownership transition, a formality that served the specific purpose of allowing him to visit as a member rather than a proprietor without drawing attention. He had the card in his wallet. He had already shown it to Priya at the welcome desk. He said, "I have a membership, yes. My daughter is in the junior program this morning." "Yes, I saw that." Diane smiled with the part of her face that was above her jaw, while the rest of her face remained still. "I just want to make sure you're familiar with how we handle certain areas of the club, particularly the terrace dining area and the main lounge. Those spaces have a designated use policy for our senior membership tier." Marcus said, "I have a senior membership." There was a pause, brief but measurable, the kind of pause that contains more information than the words that come before and after it. "Of course," Diane said. "I just want to make sure you have a good experience. Sometimes members who come through the corporate program aren't always aware of which spaces are available to them." "I understand," Marcus said. He looked at her steadily. "Thank you for letting me know." He walked past her toward the main clubhouse. He could feel her watching him as he went, and he did not alter his pace or his posture. Because he had learned, at considerable cost, over a considerable number of years, that altering your pace or your posture in moments like this was a gift you gave to the person watching, a confirmation of the very thing they were hoping to see. The main terrace at Fairview Oaks was one of the club's better features, a wide flagstone patio running the length of the south side of the clubhouse, shaded by a pergola strung with cream-colored lights that were lit even in daylight hours, with low wooden tables and deep-seated chairs that managed to feel expensive without looking stiff. On a Saturday morning, it was the best place in the building to have coffee, and Marcus had intended to sit there with a cup in the Saturday business section while Nadia finished her session. He crossed the lobby, past the dining room entrance, and stepped through the glass doors that opened onto the terrace. He had been there perhaps 4 minutes, had ordered a coffee from the attendant who came by with a small notepad and was watching the distant green of the practice range, where he could just make out the small figure of Nadia being shown her grip, when Diane Colson appeared at the terrace door. She did not walk to his table directly. She walked to the edge of the terrace first, looked out at the grounds for a moment, then turned and came to him with the same clasped hands and the same practiced pleasantness. "Mr. Webb," she said, "I'm sorry to interrupt." "You're not interrupting," Marcus said, which was true and also not the point. "I'm afraid there's been a small misunderstanding," she said. "The terrace is currently reserved for our Platinum tier members on weekend mornings. It's a standing arrangement we have with our senior membership group. I should have mentioned this earlier. I apologize for the confusion." Marcus looked at her. "My membership is Platinum tier," he said. "I understand you believe that," Diane said, and there was something in the way she said it that was the verbal equivalent of a door being gently but firmly closed. "But our records show your registration as standard access through the corporate program. I've checked twice. I don't want you to feel unwelcome, Mr. Webb. I just want to make sure we're following the guidelines we have in place." The attendant who had taken Marcus's coffee order appeared at the edge of the terrace and set a cup down on the table across from Marcus at an empty seat. Diane looked at the cup. Something moved across her expression, quick and barely visible, the internal recalculation of someone who has made an assumption and is now quietly deciding how to hold it. "If you'd like to wait for your daughter in the member lounge just inside," Diane continued, "I'd be happy to arrange that for you. It's a very comfortable space." The member lounge just inside was where guests waited. It had a water station and a magazine rack and no view of anything. Marcus said, "I'd like to stay here." Diane's expression did not change, but her hands tightened slightly over each other, the knuckles visible for a moment before she relaxed them. "I understand," she said. "I'm going to need to ask you to relocate, however. We do have other members who have reserved the terrace this morning." Marcus looked around the terrace. There were 4 other occupied tables. None of them showed any sign of having reserved anything. A couple near the far railing had just arrived, the man still in the act of pulling out a chair, the woman settling a handbag on the table with the casual ease of people who do not anticipate being asked to relocate. "I see," Marcus said. He picked up his coffee cup. He did not stand up yet. "Can I ask, is there a reservation log I could see for the terrace?" Diane said. "That's an internal document." "Of course," Marcus said. He stood up then, not quickly and not slowly, with the unhurried ease of a man who has decided something and is now doing it. And he carried his coffee cup past Diane Colson and back through the glass doors into the main clubhouse. He did not look at her again. He stood just inside the glass where the lobby was cool and the limestone floor caught the September light coming through the tall east windows. And he drank his coffee and watched through the glass as Diane walked to the couple who had just sat down at the far railing table, spoke to them briefly, smiled genuinely this time, and gestured toward 2 of the better seats near the pergola, which she pulled out personally before walking back inside. The man was carrying a new member card. Marcus could see the pale blue color of it from where he stood. The standard access tier, issued within the last 30 days. He finished his coffee. The attendant from the terrace appeared inside, looking slightly uncertain, and said, "Mr. Webb, I'm sorry about that. Can I bring you anything else in here?" Marcus looked at him. He was young, 22 or 23, with an earnest quality that seemed slightly at odds with the stiffness of his uniform. His name tag said, Joel. "I'm fine, Joel, thank you," Marcus said. Joel lingered for a moment, an extra half-second beyond what the interaction required. He opened his mouth, and then he closed it, and he said instead, "Okay, let me know if you need anything." He turned and went back toward the service corridor. But at the last moment, before the corridor angled out of sight, he glanced back over his shoulder, and the look he gave Marcus was not the look of a waiter checking on a customer. It was the look of someone who had something to say and had decided, at least for now, not to say it. Marcus noted that. He noted the name Diane Colson, which was already in his memory, but now occupied a slightly different position there. He noted the number of occupied tables on the terrace, the new membership card in the other man's hand, the tightening of Diane's knuckles. He noted the photograph on the credenza wall, which he could see from where he stood, the back of his own head visible above someone else's shoulder in the reopening crowd. His phone showed 8:57. Nadia's session ran until 10:15. He had a great deal of time and very little interest in spending it in the member lounge with the water station and the magazine rack. He walked to the far end of the lobby instead, where a pair of armchairs faced the east windows and the morning light fell through the glass in long, pale rectangles across the limestone floor, and he sat down in one of them and put his phone in his pocket and was still. He was thinking about his father again. The service entrance story had not been the only one, only the first one he had heard told out loud. There had been others told more quietly, sometimes in the middle of other conversations. The way very old and heavy things sometimes surface unexpectedly in the middle of ordinary talk. Not because the person means to surface them, but because they have been carried so long that they occasionally break through the weight of the everyday. His father had carried those stories the way he carried most things, with a steadiness that Marcus had spent years understanding was not the absence of feeling, but the very long practice of not allowing feeling to be weaponized against him. Marcus sat in the armchair with the September light on the floor and thought about the practice of that, the very long discipline of it. When he reached into his jacket pocket for the small notebook he habitually carried during club visits, the motion was unhurried and unremarkable. He opened it to a fresh page. He uncapped the pen. He wrote, Diane Colson, Director of Membership Services, and then below it the time, 9:04 a.m., and below that 2 words, Terrace Platinum, and left the page open while the ink dried. 2 conversations, 1 answer. The duty manager's office was on the 2nd floor of the main clubhouse, at the end of a carpeted hallway lined with framed scorecards from notable tournaments the club had hosted across its 50-year history. Marcus found it by following the directory board, mounted near the elevator, a small brass plaque that listed the administrative offices by function rather than name, which struck him as a small but telling detail about how this building understood its own hierarchy. He walked the length of the hallway without hurrying, reading the scorecards as he passed them, each one signed by the player who had posted it, the dates ranging from the late 1970s through the early part of the current decade. The most recent one was dated 2.5 years ago, signed with a name he did not recognize, posted at 3 under par. Below the frame, a small caption gave the name of the tournament, and in smaller type, the note, generously supported by Fairview Oaks principal investor M. Webb. He stopped at that one for a moment. He had forgotten about the caption. Someone on the events committee had added it without consulting him, and by the time he had noticed it, the frame was already on the wall and the tournament was 6 months in the past, and it had seemed like an unnecessary fight to pick. He looked at it now with the particular mild discomfort of seeing your own name in a place where you were trying, at least for today, not to be seen. He knocked on the door at the end of the hallway. The duty manager was a man named Gerald Finch, mid-50s, with the patient and slightly burdened expression of someone who managed conflicts for a living and had come to regard most of them as variations on a small number of recurring themes. He asked Marcus to sit down. He listened without interrupting while Marcus described what had happened on the terrace. And when Marcus finished, Gerald leaned back in his chair with his hands flat on the desk and said, "Mr. Webb, I appreciate you bringing this to me, and I want you to know we take the experience of every member very seriously." Marcus waited. "What I can tell you," Gerald continued, "is that the terrace on weekend mornings does have an informal arrangement with our longer-standing membership group. It's not a formal reservation policy, but it's a courtesy we've extended for several years, and it reflects the relationship we have with members who have been with us for a long time. A courtesy that doesn't apply to members who joined more recently," Marcus said. Gerald shifted slightly. "I wouldn't characterize it that way." "How would you characterize it?" Gerald's hands moved on the desk, a small adjusting motion. "I'd characterize it as a long-standing tradition that we honor out of respect for the founding membership community." Marcus said, "The founding membership community of this club has largely turned over in the last 3 years. Most of the original members sold their shares when the club went through its financial restructuring." Gerald looked at him with an expression that was carefully composed, but contained at its edges the faint sign of someone recalibrating. "You seem very familiar with the club's history." "I am," Marcus said simply. There was a pause. From somewhere below them, faintly through the floor, came the muffled sound of the kitchen in mid-morning preparation, the clatter of trays, and the low vibration of ventilation. The ordinary sounds of a building at work. "I'll speak with Diane," Gerald said. "I want to assure you this was not intended as anything discriminatory. Diane has been with us for 6 years, and she takes the member experience very seriously." "I'm sure she does," Marcus said. "I'd like to understand, though, when you speak with her, what explanation she gives for allowing a couple with a 30-day standard access membership to sit on the terrace without question immediately after asking me, a platinum member, to relocate." Gerald's expression did not change, but his hands went still on the desk. "I wasn't aware of that detail," he said. "I noticed it," Marcus said. "I imagine Joel, the attendant on the terrace, also noticed it. He was present for both interactions." Gerald said, "I see." He picked up a pen, put it down again. "I'll look into it." "Thank you," Marcus said. He stood. He was nearly at the door when it opened from the other side, and Diane Colson came in, carrying a tablet, and moving with the brisk purpose of someone who has been told there is a situation that requires her attention and has already decided on the way upstairs how she intends to handle it. She stopped when she saw Marcus. For a moment, the three of them occupied the room in a geometry of mutual stillness. Gerald behind his desk, Marcus near the door, Diane in the doorway with her tablet and her clasped purpose now fractionally disrupted. "Diane," Gerald said, "Mr. Webb was just sharing some concerns about his experience on the terrace this morning. I was planning to follow up with you." Diane looked at Marcus. "Mr. Webb," she said with the tone of someone beginning a conversation they have already mentally won, "I want to apologize if you felt unwelcome. That was never my intention. The terrace arrangement is something we've maintained for years to ensure our most loyal members feel valued. It isn't a reflection of anything other than our commitment to member satisfaction." Marcus said, "I have a platinum membership." "I understand you feel that way," Diane said. She set her tablet on the edge of Gerald's desk and crossed her hands in front of her. "But as I mentioned earlier, our records show your account is standard access through the corporate program. I've verified this personally." Marcus took out his wallet. He removed his membership card, which was the platinum bordered card bearing his name and membership number, and set it on Gerald's desk. Gerald looked at it. Diane looked at it. The card was not ambiguous. "The membership number is on the card," Marcus said. "You're welcome to cross-reference it with whatever records you've pulled." Diane picked up the card and looked at it for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes, the specific quality of a person who has been very certain about something and is now being asked by the evidence in their own hands to be less certain. But certainty, Marcus had observed, does not give way easily in people who have organized their self-concept around it. And what Diane did next was the thing people do when evidence conflicts with conviction, and conviction wins. "I'll need to verify this with our membership office," she said. "There may be a data entry error. Until we confirm the status, I'd ask that you continue to observe the guidelines I outlined this morning." The room was quiet. Gerald said, "Diane." Diane said, "I'm simply following protocol." Gerald said, "I think we can look up the membership number right now," and reached for his computer. "Of course," Diane said, and her voice had acquired the particular quality of a person who has decided that what is about to be found will not change their fundamental position, that they will find a way to remain right, regardless of what the screen shows, because being wrong is not a situation they have prepared an internal response to. Marcus watched her. He was thinking, not for the first time that morning, about the word protocol, the way it was used in situations like this, as both a shield and a crowbar, something to hide behind and something to force compliance with, all at once. He had been in enough rooms over enough years to know that protocol was a neutral word that was almost never used neutrally. Protocol meant the rules as the person invoking them chose to interpret them. Protocol meant the arrangement that benefited the arrangement already in place. He did not say any of this. He stood quietly near the door and listened to Gerald's keyboard and watched Diane's face. From the hallway outside, muffled but audible, came the sound of a service cart passing, the light squeak of a wheel on carpet, and above it, a voice, unhurried and carrying easily through the gap under the office door. The voice of a man talking to someone else in the hall. "Yeah, he came through here the summer before last, too. Always dresses like he's going fishing. Mr. Webb? You know, the guy who kept this place from being a parking lot." The voice passed. The squeak of the cartwheel faded. No one in the office said anything. Diane's chin had lifted slightly. Her hands were still clasped, but they had moved higher on her wrists, the way people hold their hands when they are thinking more than they are feeling. Gerald looked at his screen. He said without looking up, "Diane, the membership record shows Platinum Individual Tier registered 3 years ago at the time of the club's capital restructuring." Diane said, "There may be a discrepancy between the registration date and the tier classification." "There isn't," Gerald said. He looked up now. "The record is clear." The silence in the room had the quality of air after a door has been closed firmly, but not slammed. The kind of quiet that holds something inside it. Marcus picked up his membership card from the desk. He put it back in his wallet. He said to neither of them in particular, and to both of them at once, "I appreciate your time." He went back into the hallway. The service cart was gone. The scorecards looked back at him from their frames along the wall. The names of players, the dates, the scores, the small caption below the second-to-last frame that no one had asked his permission to add. He stopped at that frame again. He stood there for a moment, reading the caption once more. Then he took his phone from his pocket, not to make a call, but to look at his calendar, where a meeting he had scheduled 3 weeks ago appeared on this particular Saturday afternoon at 1 o'clock. Quarterly Asset Review, Fairview Oaks on site. He had arranged it with the club's accounting firm because this visit was, among other things, a working visit, and he had intended to spend the afternoon in the administrative suite, reviewing the Q3 numbers with the external auditor, who was already en route. He confirmed the appointment was still in the system. He noted that the meeting invitation listed him by his full title, Marcus Webb, Principal Owner and Managing Partner, Fairview Oaks Country Club Holdings, LLC. He put his phone away. He walked back down the hallway toward the stairs. Through the window at the end of the hall, he could see the practice range below a long stretch of turf, still holding the green of summer, and on it, small and intent, Nadia was standing with a club in her hands, listening to Patrick demonstrate the grip, her chin at the lifted angle she used for important information. She repeated the motion he showed her once, twice, the small arc of the club, clean and unhurried. Marcus stood at the window and watched his daughter swing a golf club for the first time. He stayed there for a long moment. He was not thinking about Diane Colson or Gerald Finch or the terrace or the notebook in his jacket pocket with the 2 words and the time written under a name. He was thinking about how much she looked like her mother in the angle of her wrist, that specific tilt, a thing that people who carry loss learn to hold gently because it can break the morning if you let it. And he did not let it. He held it gently. He breathed in. He looked at his daughter swinging a golf club in the September light, and he felt underneath everything else the weight and the steadiness of the thing he was most certain of. Then he put his hand in his jacket pocket, opened the notebook to the page he had written on, and added Gerald Finch's name below Diane's. Not as an indictment, as a record. He would need one. The call that changed the room. The lobby of the main clubhouse was quieter at 11 in the morning than it had been at 9, the initial wave of weekend arrivals having moved through to the golf course or the dining room or the fitness wing, leaving the limestone floor and the tall east windows to the kind of still light that belongs to late morning, unhurried and without agenda. Marcus had moved from the armchairs near the windows to a seat at the far end of the reception area, where he could see both the main entrance and the corridor that led to the junior athletic wing. He had been there for 40 minutes, reading on his phone and occasionally looking up, and the lobby staff had settled into their mid-morning rhythms around him, with the practiced ease of people who have forgotten he was there, or chosen to behave as though they had. He was aware, without looking directly at her, that Diane Colson had passed through the lobby twice in that period. The first time she had gone from the corridor near Gerald's office toward the member services desk and spoken in a low voice with the woman stationed there, and Marcus had seen the woman glance in his direction once during the conversation and then look quickly away. The second time Diane had come from the direction of the dining room and stopped at the reception desk, collected something from Priya, and moved back the way she had come, without pausing. She had not looked at Marcus either time. The deliberateness of not looking was its own kind of looking. At 11:17, the glass doors at the end of the junior program corridor opened, and Nadia came through them, carrying her canvas bag over one shoulder and a small scorecard in her hand, which she was studying with the focused expression of someone reviewing a document of legal significance. Patrick came through behind her, pushing the cart of junior clubs, and said something to her as he came, and she looked up from the scorecard and said something back, and they both laughed. The easy laugh of people who have worked well together for a morning and know it. Marcus stood up from his chair as she crossed the lobby toward him. "How was it?" he asked. She held up the scorecard. "He let me hit real ones," she said, "and I hit one that went all the way to the flag on the short hole. Patrick said it was 47 yards. "That's impressive," Marcus said. "He said most beginners don't hit the flag on their first day," Nadia said. "He said it usually takes several sessions." She paused. "I think it was partly the glove." Marcus said he thought that was a reasonable hypothesis. They were standing in the middle of the lobby, Nadia showing him the scorecard and explaining the notation system Patrick had used to mark her shots, when Diane Colson came through the corridor from the direction of the member services wing and entered the lobby from the far side. She saw them. She stopped for barely a step, then continued walking toward them on a path that was either purposeful or incidental, and it became purposeful when she angled toward the reception desk and then changed her angle again slightly to bring her closer to where they stood. "Mr. Webb," she said when she reached them, "I want to follow up on our conversation this morning." Marcus looked up from Nadia's scorecard. "I've had a chance to review the records more carefully," Diane said, "and I stand by my assessment that there may be a discrepancy in how your membership was originally entered. Until that's resolved, I want to ask that you confine your access to the standard member areas, which include the lobby, the member lounge, and the golf facilities. The terrace and main dining room remain subject to the weekend arrangement I mentioned. Nadia looked up from her scorecard, and then looked at Marcus, and then looked at Diane. She said nothing. She had the quality in that moment of a child who is paying close attention and will remember what she sees. Marcus said, "The duty manager has reviewed my membership record and confirmed my tier status." "Gerald and I have spoken," Diane said. "I've raised the concern through the appropriate channel within our member services protocol, and until it's resolved at that level, the standing arrangement applies." The lobby had not gone quiet exactly, but the particular quality of ambient sound had shifted in the way sound shifts when people in a shared space become aware, without looking directly, that something is happening near them. Priya at the welcome desk had gone very still. A couple crossing the lobby had slowed imperceptibly. "Diane," Marcus said, and his voice had the quality that very still water has, not because nothing was happening beneath it, but because whatever was happening had not yet decided to surface. "I've provided my membership card. The duty manager has verified the record. I have a platinum membership, and I'm going to take my daughter to the dining room for lunch before we leave. I'd like you to be very certain about what you're doing before you ask me to do otherwise again." Something moved across Diane's face. It was not the simple calculation of a person being challenged. It was older and more complicated than that. The collision between a conviction she had held a long time and the first real evidence that the conviction might be expensive. But she had gone too far in her own internal accounting to reverse on the lobby floor, with Priya watching, and the couple who had slowed, now standing near the credenza, pretending to look at the photographs. "I'm going to need to ask you to wait here while I contact our general manager," Diane said. "And if you're unable to comply with the member services guidelines, I'll have to ask our security staff to assist." Nadia's hand had found her father's sleeve. She was not gripping it, just resting her fingers there. The light, careful touch of a child who has understood that something is wrong and has decided her role is to stay close. Marcus looked at Diane for one long moment. He did not answer. Behind Diane, from the direction of the maintenance corridor that ran along the back of the lobby, a door swung open and a man came through it, pushing a floor buffer on a long handle. A man in his 60s with broad shoulders and a face that had been worked by outdoor weather into something that resembled the grain of good wood. Dark and deeply lined and very settled, he had the rolling, unhurried walk of someone who has been moving through this building for a long time and regards its spaces as familiar rather than formal. His uniform was the same green and ivory as Diane's, but worn the way a garment becomes when it has been washed many times. The colors slightly softened, the fabric shaped to its wearer. His name tag read Roy. He pushed his floor buffer past the edge of the lobby, heading for the corridor behind the dining room entrance. He was not looking at the small confrontation near the welcome desk. And then something in the peripheral arrangement of the room, some quality of the grouping, must have registered in the corner of his vision. Because he slowed the buffer and turned his head slightly, the automatic attention of someone who has heard a note in a chord that doesn't belong. He looked at Marcus. He stopped. The floor buffer handle settled against his shoulder as he stood fully still. His face went through something swift and unmistakable. The reorganization of recognition. The moment when a face you know arrives in a context where you did not expect it, and your mind reassembles the situation around it. "Mr. Webb," Roy said. His voice carried easily across the lobby. Not loud, but carrying the way voices carry in a room with limestone floors and high ceilings. "I didn't know you were in today." Diane turned. Priya had looked up. The couple by the credenza had both turned. A man coming out of the dining room entrance stopped in the doorway. Roy walked toward them, leaving the buffer leaning against the wall. He had the matter-of-fact directness of a man who has never learned to perform social hesitation and does not intend to start. "I was going to send your assistant the maintenance report for the East Wing this week," he said to Marcus. The limestone grout along the window line is starting to show wear. Want me to walk you through it? Diane was standing between them. She was very still, the stillness of a person processing the revision of every assumption they have made in the last 3 hours. I'd appreciate that, Marcus said. He looked at Roy with the same settled quiet he had held all morning. How long have you been here, Roy? 11 years in March, Roy said. He glanced at Diane briefly and without emphasis, then back at Marcus. Everything all right? Before Marcus could answer, the phone at the reception desk rang. Priya answered it. Something in the way she answered it, the slight change in her posture, the particular attention she gave to the receiver, drew every eye in the lobby briefly to her. She said, "Yes, of course. One moment." She pressed a button, and her voice came from the small speaker mounted above the desk, the intercommunication system that reached the administrative offices and the secondary desk near the dining room entrance. "Gerald, you have a call from the External Accounts Office confirming the 1 o'clock asset review with Mr. Marcus Webb, principal owner. They're confirming he's on site. Please advise." The lobby held its breath. Diane Colson turned back toward Marcus. Her expression had gone through something that no professional composure was adequate to conceal. The absolute and total reorganization of a person who has understood in a single moment that the ground they were standing on is not the ground they thought it was. The color in her face had receded, not dramatically, not the theatrical pallor of a movie, but in the way color actually recedes when the blood that carries it is being redirected by a system responding to the signal that something has gone very wrong. Nadia looked up at her father. She said quietly, "Dad, is she the one who said we couldn't sit outside?" Marcus looked down at his daughter. He said just as quietly, "Yes." Nadia considered this. She looked at Diane. The look was not angry. It was the clear, unpracticed assessment of a child who is taking inventory of a person filing what she sees somewhere inside herself, where it will stay for a long time. Diane opened her mouth. Whatever she had intended to say, it did not arrive. She closed her mouth again. Roy was looking at her with the particular expression of a man who has worked in a place for 11 years and has watched certain things happen and has opinions about them that he has kept to himself for approximately 11 years, and is now finding the patience for that somewhat strained. Marcus's phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He did not take it out. He knew who it was. The accounting office confirming what the intercommunication system had just announced to the lobby of his own club. He looked at Diane. "The 1 o'clock meeting," he said very calmly, "is in the administrative suite. I'll need access to the financial records from Q2 and Q3. I'd also like a list of all member services decisions made in the last quarter that involved relocation requests, access restrictions, or complaints." He paused. "All of them." Diane said nothing. The man in the dining room doorway had gone back inside. The couple at the credenza had stopped pretending to look at the photographs. Priya was sitting very still behind the welcome desk, with the telephone receiver set precisely back on its cradle. Roy picked up his floor buffer. He said, in the same even tone he used for everything, "I'll get you the East Wing maintenance report before one Mr. Webb." He turned and walked back toward the maintenance corridor. The lobby sound came back slowly, the way ordinary noise returns to a space after something has moved through it and resettled. But it came back at a different frequency than it had been before. The particular quality of ambient sound in a room where everyone has understood something and is deciding what to do with the understanding. Marcus looked at his daughter. He said, "Are you hungry?" Nadia said, "Yes." Marcus said, "Let's go have lunch." He walked toward the dining room entrance with his hand resting lightly on Nadia's shoulder, and behind him, the lobby of the Fairview Oaks Country Club, his country club, was very quiet in a way it had never been quiet before while he was in it. And Diane Colson stood where she was, alone in the middle of the limestone floor, The morning she had managed falling entirely apart around her, and she had not yet moved. What the club owes. Gerald Finch's office had not changed in the 2 hours since Marcus had last been in it. But the room felt different now, in the way rooms feel different when the people inside them have been rearranged by information. Gerald was behind his desk again, but he was sitting differently, less in the posture of a manager managing a situation, and more in the posture of a man who has understood that the situation had been managing him, which was a more honest position, but also a less comfortable one. Diane sat in one of the 2 chairs in front of the desk. Marcus sat in the other. The afternoon light was moving across the wall, now longer and lower than it had been in the morning, giving the framed certificates and the diplomas and the photograph of the club from a helicopter that hung above Gerald's credenza a quality slightly more golden than their frames deserved. Marcus had asked a member of the front desk to take Nadia to the junior games room, where there was a table of art supplies and a shelf of board games and a window that looked out onto the practice range. Nadia had gone without resistance, bringing her canvas bag and her scorecard, which she was apparently not yet finished analyzing. Diane had been called to this room by Gerald, not by Marcus, which was a distinction that mattered. Gerald had called her in the 7 minutes between the lobby and the dining room, while Marcus and Nadia were being seated at a window table by a server who moved with the careful attentiveness of someone who had been in the hallway adjacent to the lobby at 11:23 and had drawn certain conclusions from what they had heard. Gerald had eaten those 7 minutes alone in his office. Marcus imagined sitting with the particular stillness of a person revising a great deal very quickly. Diane had come to the room with the composure of a person who has had 20 minutes in which to rebuild composure and has done a creditable job. She was sitting with her hands in her lap, her tablet on the desk in front of her, her expression arranged into something that was not the professional pleasantness of the morning, but was its quieter, more serious cousin. The look of a person prepared to defend a position they have begun to suspect may not be defensible. "Diane," Gerald said, "I want to go through what happened this morning in as much detail as you can provide." "Of course," Diane said. "Starting with your first interaction with Mr. Webb," Diane said. "I was doing a standard walkthrough of the lobby at opening, which is part of my Saturday morning protocol. I noticed Mr. Webb and his daughter entering and proceeded to verify his membership status, which I do for any member I don't personally recognize." Marcus said, "Do you ask every member you don't personally recognize to verify their status, or only some of them?" Diane looked at him. "I ask members I'm not familiar with." "The couple on the terrace," Marcus said. "You were familiar with them." "They had been introduced to me during their orientation." 3 weeks ago," Marcus said. "You retain the faces of every member introduced to you during orientation." A pause. "I make an effort to." "The standard access couple who joined 30 days ago," Marcus said, "was allowed onto the Platinum Terrace without being asked to verify anything. I was asked to verify and then relocated despite presenting a valid Platinum card. I'd like you to explain the distinction." Diane's hands moved in her lap. "I had a concern about the record discrepancy." Gerald confirmed there was no discrepancy. "At that point, yes. Earlier in the morning, I believed there was, and in the time between your belief and the confirmation," Marcus said, "you escalated the situation twice, requested my relocation, and asked security staff to be notified, based on a concern that took Gerald approximately 4 minutes to resolve with a database lookup." The room was quiet. Gerald was looking at his desk. Diane said, "I was following what I understood to be the appropriate protocol for a disputed membership status." "Diane," Marcus said, and his voice had not changed in temperature or pace. It had the quality of something that had been very consistent for a long time. "I've been to this club 16 times in the last 18 months. I've walked through this lobby, sat in those armchairs, had coffee in the dining room. Have you spoken to me on any of those visits?" Diane said nothing. This morning, Marcus continued, you spoke to me within 3 minutes of my entering the building. You followed me to the terrace. You returned twice to ask me to relocate. You described my membership as standard access without looking it up. And then, when the information was confirmed, you continued to maintain your position and indicated you would involve security. He paused. What was different about this morning? Gerald said quietly. Diane. Diane looked at Gerald. Something in her face had shifted, not crumbled. Diane was not the crumbling type, but the arrangement had changed. The way the surface of something changes when the structure beneath it is no longer holding with the same certainty. I want to be honest, she said. Please, Marcus said. She was quiet for a moment, and in that moment, she looked older than she had looked in the lobby. Not in a sympathetic way, but in an accurate one. In the way people look when they stop performing something, and what's underneath is simply a person in their 50s, with a job they have been doing for 6 years, and a set of unexamined assumptions they are now being asked to examine. There are members, Diane said carefully, long-standing members who have expressed concern over the last several years about changes to the club's membership composition. I won't attribute opinions to specific individuals, but those concerns have been communicated to member services in various forms. And I have, over time, developed an approach to managing the member experience that, in retrospect, may have reflected those concerns more than it reflected our stated policies. The silence in the room had a different quality now, not the silence of a confrontation, but the silence of something having been said that cannot be unsaid. Marcus looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "That is the most honest thing you've said today." Diane said nothing. Gerald picked up his pen, set it down again. Diane, given the findings from this morning, I'm going to need to place you on administrative leave pending a formal review. That review will examine member service interactions across the last 12 months. Specifically, any incidents involving access disputes, relocation requests, or membership status challenges. He paused. HR will contact you this afternoon with the details. Diane looked at Gerald. Then she looked at Marcus. Her expression was not a single thing. It was several things at once. Anger and shame, and a kind of defensive bewilderment. The look of a person who had believed they were protecting something, and was only now being asked to examine what exactly that something was, and whether it had ever deserved protecting. She said, "I've given 6 years to this club." "I know," Gerald said. She picked up her tablet. She stood up. Her posture was still very straight, the same posture she had carried through the lobby and the terrace and the morning. And she walked to the door with it, and she opened the door, and she left without another word. And the room held the shape of her absence for a moment before settling back into itself. Gerald leaned back in his chair. He looked at Marcus with the expression of a man who has a great deal to say and is choosing for now to say none of it. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Yes," Marcus said. "But what I'm more interested in is what happens next." Gerald said, "The review." "The review is one piece," Marcus said. "What I want to understand is how we got here. Not just Diane, and not just today. I want to understand how a culture develops in a member services department, where a director believes her job is to filter the membership based on criteria that have nothing to do with our stated policies, and no one catches it for 6 years." Gerald said, "That is a fair question. I also want the names of the members who communicated those concerns to member services," Marcus said. "I'm not looking to expel anyone. I am looking to have a direct conversation with them about what this club is and what it isn't, and what they can expect from a club that has my name on the deed." Gerald wrote something on a notepad. He said, "I'll pull the records." "Good," Marcus said. He stood. At the door, he stopped with his hand on the frame. "Roy," he said, The maintenance staff member. How long has he been with the club? 11 years, Gerald said. He came with the building, technically. He was here before the restructuring. I want his supervisor evaluation updated and forwarded to the owner's office by end of week, Marcus said. And I want the possibility of a senior facilities coordination role reviewed. He knows this building better than anyone else in it. Gerald wrote that down too. Marcus went back downstairs. The junior games room was off the east corridor, a small bright room with the slightly chaotic warmth of a space that has been used by children on many Saturday mornings. An art supply table, where several colors of marker had been left uncapped. A shelf of board games, with the boxes showing the wear of frequent use, and a window looking out onto the practice range, where the September light was now at the lower, longer angle of early afternoon. Nadia was sitting at the art table, not doing art, but working on her scorecard with a pencil, filling in something at the margins of the columns, a notation of some private system she was developing. She looked up when Marcus came in. "Done with your meeting?" she asked. "Not finished," Marcus said, "but done with the hard part." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "What are you working on?" She turned the scorecard toward him. She had added a second column next to Patrick's distance notation. Her own column labeled in careful capital letters, "My opinion." "I disagreed with some of his assessments," she said. Marcus looked at the scorecard and at the margin annotations, and at his daughter across the art supply table. "What did you disagree about?" "He said the 47-yard one was lucky," she said, "because it bounced off the edge of the flag stand. But I aimed for the flag, and I hit the flag area, so I think it counts even if it wasn't exactly how I imagined it." Marcus said, "I think you're right," Nadia said. "Also, Dad." She put the pencil down. She looked at him the way she looked at things she had been thinking about while appearing to be thinking about something else. The slightly older look she occasionally wore that reminded him of her mother in a way that was entirely bearable, like that specific slant of light. "That lady this morning." "Yes," Marcus said. "She didn't know who you were," Nadia said. "No, but she was still wrong," Nadia said. "Right, like, even if you weren't the owner, she was still wrong." Marcus was quiet for a moment. The practice range outside the window was mostly empty now, the morning lessons done. The midday lull before the afternoon players arrived. A single groundskeeper was moving along the far edge of the range with a tool Marcus recognized as a turf aerator, the same kind Roy had requisitioned 3 years ago when the East Green was showing stress patterns in the dry season. "Yes," Marcus said. She was still wrong. Nadia picked up her pencil again. She said, "I thought so." She went back to her margin notations with the focused economy of someone who has completed a separate task and is returning to the main one. Marcus sat with her in the small room with the uncapped markers and the worn board game boxes and the September light on the window. He did not feel the clean, uncomplicated satisfaction of someone who had won something. He felt something older and less tidy than that, the particular weight of a morning that had required him to be simultaneously a man protecting his daughter and a man deciding the future of people's employment, and a man carrying a story about a father who used the service entrance for 11 years. All of these at once, in the same body, in the same room, with no clean boundary between them. He sat with that. It was not comfortable. He did not need it to be comfortable. 6 weeks later, on a Thursday morning in late October, a family arrived at the main entrance of Fairview Oaks Country Club. The parents were in their mid-30s and had the slightly uncertain air of people arriving somewhere for the first time and not yet sure of the protocols. Their 2 children, a boy of about 10 and a girl of about 6, were in coordinated polo shirts that looked carefully chosen and had the slight stiffness of clothes worn for an occasion. The family had been referred by a colleague who described the club as having changed significantly in the last year. meaning specifically that the staff had been described as genuinely welcoming rather than formally tolerant of welcoming, which was a distinction the referring colleague was careful to make. At the welcome desk, a young woman named Priya looked up when they came in and said, "Welcome to Fairview Oaks. Can I get your names?" The woman said their names. Priya found the reservation. She came around the desk and walked them personally toward the main corridor, describing the facilities as she went. The dining room, the golf facilities, the junior program, the terrace that was open to all members all day on weekends. The children were looking around with the wide, cataloging attention of children arriving somewhere new. The girl in particular, noting with visible approval a patch of sunlight on the limestone floor that was the specific shade her brother reported her as saying later of blue-green rather than regular green. The family was shown to a table on the terrace. The server who brought their menus had a small badge below his name tag that read Service Mentor, a new designation that had been introduced 6 weeks earlier to recognize frontline staff who had completed the club's revised hospitality and inclusion training. The server's name was Joel. He had completed the training in its first available session and had been among those who provided written statements during the member services review. The badge was not a large thing. It sat below his name on a slightly lower line. But he wore it with the particular quiet ease of someone who has been recognized for the right thing. Roy did not see the family arrive. He was in the East Wing when they came through, reviewing the limestone grout repair that had been completed the previous week, walking the window line with the specific attention of someone who knows a building the way you know a person, not from the documents about them, but from the daily reality of their presence. He was scheduled to meet with the Facilities Committee the following Tuesday in his new role as Senior Facilities Coordinator, a title that came with a 23% salary increase and a seat at the quarterly planning table. He had mentioned it to his wife the evening he was told, not with ceremony, but with the straightforwardness of someone reporting a fact that he found both satisfying and long overdue. And she had said it was about time, and he had agreed with her completely. Diane Colson's review had concluded the previous month. The investigation had identified 11 documented incidents across 2 years in which members or potential members had experienced access challenges, relocation requests, or status disputes that were inconsistent with their actual membership tier. 8 of those incidents involved members of color. Diane had been offered a resolution that involved her resignation, a separation agreement, and a requirement that she complete a professional retraining program before seeking employment in a customer-facing hospitality role. She had accepted the terms. What she carried out of that building and what she was beginning to understand about what she had been doing and why, no document recorded. That reckoning was her own. The 3 longtime members who had communicated composition concerns to member services had each received a personal letter from Marcus Webb, not from the club's legal office, not from Gerald Finch's desk, but from Marcus directly. The letter described what the club was, what it intended to be, and what the membership agreement meant under his ownership. It was not a threatening letter. It was a precise one. 2 of the 3 members had renewed their memberships without comment. 1 had not renewed and had not responded to the letter. Marcus had noted all 3 outcomes and moved on. On the terrace on that October Thursday morning, the family's younger daughter looked out at the golf course from their table and said something to her father in a low voice. Her father leaned down to hear it, then looked out at the course, then looked back at her and smiled in the way parents smile when a child says something that is both simple and exactly right. She had asked if the grass was always that color. He told her it was. Some places look the way they do because of what was put into them, and the truth of what was put into them eventually shows in the surface, in the grain of it, in the way the light falls on a morning when everything is as it should be. The grass at Fairview Oaks was green the way things are green when they have been tended carefully and for a long time, and it was beautiful, in the plain, unargued way of things that do not need to announce themselves. Marcus Webb had known that from the first morning he drove through those gates, with a rented sedan and a clipboard, and the quiet, unshakable belief that a thing neglected was not a thing finished. He had built something here that outlasted the morning he had been told it wasn't his. It had always been his. And now, on a Thursday in October, with a family eating breakfast on the terrace and the light on the golf course, and Roy in the East Wing, and Joel wearing his badge, it felt, for the first time in a long time, like it fully knew it.